What if I told you that your decisions, big or small, aren't entirely your own, but are shaped by invisible connections that you have with everybody around you? Let's talk about it. First off, it's nice to meet you. My name is Claire. I've been a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints my entire life. In other words, I'm a forever Mormon. Throughout my life, and especially my academic career, I've been fascinated with things such as sociology, anthropology, and psychology. I love understanding how people work in their everyday lives. And today, I'm interested in exploring how sociology meets Mormonism.
Oh yeah, it's all coming together.
Throughout this video, I will be referring to the findings presented in this book. It's called Connected: The Surprising Power of Our Social Networks and How They Shape Our Lives, written by Nicholas Christakis and James Fowler. Both are known for their research into social networks. Speaking of social networks, I would like to start off with a little story. During my senior year of high school, we were just exiting the time of COVID, and I wanted to have a little fun, so I was really curious about when we were going to do our senior skip day. I went to my friends and I asked, who's in charge of senior skip day? When are we going to do it? And everybody kept telling me, we're not going to do senior skip day. I decided to take matters into my own hands. So what I did is I took note of the 4 other people who I knew in my senior class who had a great influence, who had big friend groups, and whom almost everybody knew. And I went to those 4 guys and I said, hey, here's a link to a Discord. Join this group chat. After a couple months of the 4 of us spreading this word, we were able to get the majority of our senior class to skip school that day. This is a small example of a social contagion. What Christakis and Fowler have found out throughout research and experiments is that a social contagion, such as my opening story with senior skip day, works because our social networks operate like a superorganism. You see, a superorganism is a group of organisms that essentially act like a single organism, despite being composed of many individuals. I thought this was kind of crazy. Before reading the book that I mentioned, when I heard the word superorganism, I would think something like maybe a flock of sterlings or a herd of zebras. 2 such cases in which a group of animals acting like a single organism is very beneficial, especially in terms of confusing or warding off predators. However, human networks working as a superorganism has started to make more sense, especially after I learned about the concept of the 3 degrees of influence that each human has. The 3 degrees work like this. Your first degree are your friends, your family, and those you come in contact with often. This can be your coworkers, your classmates, your spouse, your best friend, your family that you live with. This is in your first degree of influence. Your second degree of influence are the friends of your friends or the friends of your family. For example, I'm married. My husband, he has a coworker that I don't know, but that person is in my second degree of influence. And then there's your third degree of influence. These are the friends of your friends' friends. So my husband has a coworker and that coworker has a brother. That person is in my third degree of influence. Throughout these degrees of influence or these social networks, many things can spread. We all experienced it in 2020 when COVID-19 spread from just a few people in a small town in China to millions of people worldwide. Other things besides illness spread. A few examples are obesity, binge drinking, smoking, and also the cessation of smoking, word-of-mouth recommendations for products and services, innovation and ideas, emotions, attitudes, and many other things. For example of attitudes, let's take a look at the lost children of Rockdale County. This is an interesting event that occurred in 1996. Rockdale County, Georgia, is a quiet upper-middle-class suburb about 20 miles outside of Atlanta, known as a family-friendly community, which made it appealing to parents who wanted a safe, wholesome, and progressive environment in which to raise their children. In short, this is probably not the place you imagine when you think of a syphilis epidemic.
What?
No, all right. I know that sounds bad.
Imagine the surprise the community experienced when medical officials started to receive dozens of young teenagers into their office, each one complaining of symptoms related to syphilis, a sexually transmitted disease.
Let me see what you have. No!
This is a clip from the documentary The Lost Children of Rockdale County by PBS. Notice that in it, they show a map of the kids' social network.
In the end, 17 young people tested positive for syphilis. More than 200 others were exposed and treated. Approximately 50 of them reported being involved in extreme sexual behavior.
You don't expect to see a 14-year-old with 20, 30, 40, 50, or 100 sex partners. You expect that of someone who is more into the line of being a prostitute or something. And these girls were not homeless. They were not abused in any way. These were just normal, everyday, regular kids.
What I didn't mention in the clip is that the youngest kids involved were 11 and 12 years old. And in the case of every teenager within this complex social network, the parents were unaware of what was going on until medical officials got involved. When the situation came to light, many people began to question what made the children in a wealthy, wholesome community behave this way. Really, the STDs were a reflection of a different network process, said Christakis and Fowler. The spread of a norm was the issue. See, the norm among teenagers that sex, and sex of a particular kind, involving multiple partners often, was acceptable. The real epidemic, the one that at the root of the STD epidemic, was an epidemic of attitudes. Syphilis was not the problem, they say. It was a symptom of the problem. To further explain this concept of a norm, I'm going to read you an excerpt from the book where they describe a norm in the context of how obesity spreads throughout social networks.
Human beings share their ideas with one another, and these ideas can affect how much we eat and also how much we exercise. For example, we might look at those around us to see that they're gaining weight, and this might change our ideas about acceptable body size.
Stung by a bee, Scott?
A big bee?
When many people start gaining weight, it can reset our expectations about what it actually means to be overweight. What spreads from person to person is what social scientists call a norm.
Let me explain something to you. You see, you're not normal.
Which is a shared expectation about what is appropriate.
I don't think it's appropriate for me to talk about it.
Just as the Rockdale County teenagers adjusted their sexual norms to dismay of the adults, people's ideas about what is considered fat have changed rapidly, and niches within a social network can arise. In these niches, people can reinforce particular norms so that directly and indirectly connected people share an idea about something without realizing they're being influenced by one another.
As I mentioned before, I am a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. In our church, we have seen the impact of social norms in the rate of temple marriages in the younger generations. In 2005, our then president, Thomas S. Monson, gave a devotional in which he shared the findings of a survey that they had recently taken.
In a survey which was made in selected wards and stakes of the church, we learned a most significant fact. Those persons whose friends married in the temple usually married in the temple, while those persons whose friends did not marry in the temple usually did not marry in the temple. The influence of one's friends appeared to be an equal or even more dominant factor than parental urging, classroom instruction, or proximity to a temple.
To connect what Thomas S. Monson said about temple marriage to what we were talking about when it comes to norms and social networks, when the norm is being married in the temple, we are more likely to be married in the temple. Just like in the case of Rockdale County, the norm is not set by parents or family, but by friends and peers. I grew up reading something called For the Strength of Youth. This is a pamphlet that details the standards that youth of our church strive to keep. In the section entitled Friends, it says this: as you seek to be a friend to others, do not compromise your standards. If your friends urge you to do things that are wrong, be the one to stand for the right, even if you stand alone. You may need to find other friends who will support you in keeping the commandments. Growing up as a member of the church, I was very particular with the friends that I chose to spend my time with, because, as this pamphlet encourages, I wanted to only spend my time with friends who would help me to maintain the standards taught to me by my parents, by my siblings, and by the leaders of our church. And understandably, members of our church have been criticized for such attitudes and for such things. I have even witnessed critics within the faith say that we have a responsibility to be missionaries to those who believe differently than we do, and thus should not evade social interactions with people who have different standards than us. Though I believe that we are called to be missionaries to the world, I also believe it is okay and realistic to step away from relationships that could influence us negatively. As we've seen, the influence of our peers is more powerful than we understand sometimes. The standards we maintain as members of the church are patterned after the commandments of God. In other words, we could call these God's norms. The best known articulation of God's norms are the 10 Commandments. All of Christianity and Judaism believe in and strive to keep these commandments. A commandment that is alluded to, but not explained in its entirety on this list, is the law of chastity. This is a commandment that we take very seriously in my faith. We believe that marriage is only to be between a man and a woman. We believe that it is a sin to have sex outside of marriage. And we believe that gender is essential to God's plan for the eternal happiness of His children. Obviously, these are beliefs that are increasingly under attack due to the norms of our society changing dramatically. For example, a number of American adults who identify as part of the LGBTQ+ community has more than doubled in the last 12 years. This is according to a new polling from Gallup. In addition to this, according to the Institute for Family Studies, in America today, around 70% of people cohabit before marriage.
And they were roommates.
Oh my God, they were roommates.
And almost 90% of people have sex before they marry. Moreover, around 40% of children are born to unmarried mothers. While we understand and accept that certain norms do change, we reject the assertion that truth and morality are subjective. Here are a few quotes from a couple of the leaders of our church on this topic.
God reveals to His prophets that there are moral absolutes. Sin will always be sin. The world changes constantly and dramatically, but God, His commandments, and promised blessings do not change.
Latter-day Saints proclaim that marriage between a man and a woman is ordained of God and that the family is central to the Creator's plan for the eternal destiny of His children. We also know that gender is an essential characteristic of individual premortal, mortal, and eternal identity and purpose. Civil governments are heavily influenced by social trends and secular philosophies as they write, rewrite, and enforce laws. Regardless of what civil legislation may be enacted, the doctrine of the Lord regarding marriage and morality cannot be changed. Remember, sin, even if legalized by man, is still sin in the eyes of God. Existentialists can expound, relativists can rationalize with their constricted views of reality that truth is only a subjective experience. Laws are laws. God's truth is really true. What God says is right, and what He says is wrong.
Like I said before, we reject the assertion that truth and morality are subjective. While the norms around sexuality and marriage have shifted dramatically in our culture, we believe and proclaim that God's commandments, God's norms, will never change, especially when it comes to core doctrines such as those surrounding marriage and sexuality. It is often said that Christians are to be in the world but not of the world. Essentially, we are supposed to interact with others and treat them with love and respect. But we need to be wary about which social networks we become embedded in, because whether we are aware of how they influence us or not, they will influence us. You didn't think I was going to end the video there, did you? My whole thing up to now has been about the negative effects that our social networks can have on each one of us. But you know what? They can have positive ones too. And while we do need to be choosy or particular about the networks that we choose to embed ourselves in, we can bring about great change to the small organizations, communities, and networks that we are naturally a part of. I mean, this is something that Jesus Christ literally taught about on the Sermon on the Mount in the book of Matthew.
Ye are the light of the world.
A city that is set on a hill cannot be hid. Neither do men light a candle and put it under a bushel, but on a candlestick, and it giveth light unto all that are in the house. Let your light so shine before men, that they may see your good works and glorify your Father which is in heaven.
As we stand apart from the norms of the social networks that we are naturally embedded in, we will naturally be lights unto the world. We will naturally be that city on the hill that cannot be hid, because we will stick out like a sore thumb. That's kind of the way it goes for Christians. As I was reading my scriptures this past week, something that I noticed was that he uses an analogy of leaven to discuss the effect that we can have on those around us. For example, he warned about the spread of bad doctrine and ideas using the analogy of leaven in Matthew 16.
Then Jesus said unto them, Take heed and beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and of the Sadducees. And they reasoned among themselves, saying, It is because we have taken no bread. Which when Jesus perceived, he said unto them, O ye of little faith, why reason ye among yourselves, because ye have brought no bread? How is it that ye do not understand that I spake it not to you concerning bread, that ye should beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and of the Sadducees? Then understood they how that he bade them not beware of the leaven of bread, but of the doctrine of the Pharisees and of the Sadducees.
But even earlier in the Bible, in Matthew chapter 13, he uses the same analogy of leaven, spreading throughout the dough and leavening the entire dough, to talk about the kingdom of God.
Another parable spake he, Jesus, unto them. The kingdom of heaven is like unto leaven, which a woman took and hid in 3 measures of meal, till the whole was leavened.
As members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, we believe that the church is the kingdom of God on earth. With that context, Latter-day Saints can come to the understanding that the church's presence on the earth works to raise and improve the world for all of God's children, not just those who are members of the church. All this to say, just as networks can be destructive, they can be very positive as well. For example, let's look at the spread of happiness throughout social networks. You remember the 3 degrees of influence that we talked about just a bit ago? Well, that's going to come back.
We are back!
So through mathematical analysis of social networks, Christakis and Fowler discovered that if a person was happy, those directly connected to them were about 15% more likely to be happy. So those are the people within the first degree of influence. At the second degree of influence, the happiness increased by about 10%. And at the third degree of influence, it was 6%. So 15, 10, 6%, that doesn't seem like a lot. But that is astronomical when you consider that the average person's happiness only increases by about 2% when they receive a $10,000 raise. That's incredible. Furthermore, Christakis and Fowler discovered that each happy friend a person has increases that person's probability of being happy by about 9%, while each unhappy friend a person has decreases it by about 7%. So our friends can make us sadder too, but it's not as powerful as the happiness that they can bring us. So if you're just looking at the law of averages, each friend that we accept into our lives has a better chance of making us happy than making us sad. And that's the same for other people. Every time we reach out to a person and try to initiate a friendship with them, we have a greater chance of making them happier people than we do of making them sadder people.
Nice.
To connect it again to members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, a study done in 2009 found that members of the church who attended church weekly had a significantly lower rate of depression than those who were inactive or those who attended not at all. And then another more recent Pew study in 2019 showed that actively religious people, just religion in general, are more likely to describe themselves as very happy. And this was in every country wherein data was collected. I think it's obvious that religion is good for us. It certainly has been good for me. It's provided me with a lot of meaning and a lot of joy in my life. Religion is good for us. Religion makes us happier. And as we share this happiness with those around us, we will automatically help to improve the lives of everybody within the natural social networks in which we inhabit, but also the unnatural social networks that we inhabit, such as organizations, communities, or clubs. As we are happy, we will influence others in a positive way that they may not be fully aware of. To finish, I'm going to leave you with a portion of a famous poem written by Marianne Williamson that I believe perfectly sums up the point that I am trying to get across in this video. You have power. Those around you have power. Wield it wisely.
You are a child of God. Your playing small does not serve the world. We were born to make manifest the glory of God that is within us. It's not just in some of us, it's in everyone. And as we let our own light shine, we unconsciously give other people permission to do the same. As we are liberated from our own fear, our presence automatically liberates others.